Hello, everyone. This is LeAura Alderson, and I'm here today with Janet Neal of the Superb Woman, and that's superb with a capital B or a highlighted B, and met her through Allie Schuyler, a mutual friend, and so I'm looking forward to getting to meet her today along with you. So welcome, Janet.
Thanks so much. I'm so thrilled to be here with you.
It's great to see you're a beautiful woman, and I hope everyone will go to your site, which of course will provide all the links, and watch your intro video. It's just about 30 seconds. I love the colors you're wearing in the video, by the way, just beautiful. And one of the things besides your beautiful persona and magnetic personality that got my attention was the line at the very end of the video. I don't want to spoil it for people, but at the end it says, you know, if women can be themselves, that is where the power is. Could you elaborate on that just a little bit? Because you said, when you and I spoke right before coming on camera, you said that that just what spontaneously came up, that your real sort of slogan is, it's all about the bee. And
Right.
so we can talk about that in a minute too. But it's clear from the way that that spontaneously came up that it's a part of your teaching, your coaching, your service, and your gift to the world. So we have a little bit of feedback, and it could be that I need to get an earbuds. How's it sounding on your side before we get started? I know I asked a question and I interrupted the question, but.
It sounds okay. Every once in a while it gets a little muddled.
Okay. So I'm hearing some. Would you still be able to hear me if you bumped your volume down just a little bit?
Sure, I could. Let me find where I do that. Audio. How do I do this?
I'm on a Mac, so I'm not sure on a PC.
I am on a Mac too.
Oh, okay, well look at your, are you on a laptop keyboard? There's the.
Oh, just that? Oh, okay.
Yeah, just bump it down there. That'll work.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, I think so. Well, it'll.
No, I can't hear you. Okay.
Okay. So we'll see how it goes. And if we get interrupted, then we'll pause the video and come on again with earbuds and things.
Okay.
Okay. So back to the concept of that phrase, about if you could elaborate on that concept of, here it is. Where did it go? Do you remember it? I just dropped it down.
Can step into their power.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, this all came about maybe about 2 years ago. I was at a point, I had been working for a friend of mine for about 3 years, helped her to establish a second location for her business, and was standing there looking around and thought, I have just helped somebody else to achieve their dreams. It's time for me. So I decided to go back out. I had been an entrepreneur prior to that, and knew that, you know, my passions were all about balance, all about letting go of this superwoman role, which is a totally unsustainable model. But I wasn't quite sure how I wanted that to look. So I did what I always do when I'm in these kind of transition phases, is I give myself the gift of time. And I give myself like 30 days to observe and just to see what's going on, and how this intersects with what my passions are. So in those 30 days, I looked around. It didn't take me too long to realize that the world is in a mess. And then the thought came to me that women have the power to change this world if they realize they have it, and that so many of us do not realize we have power, or are giving our power away, or don't believe that we have it.
Yeah.
And I thought, that is exactly what I can do. I can help women to understand how powerful they are, to tap into that personal power, and to be able to live these powerful lives, putting out positive energy for the betterment of all. So that, you know, I was thinking about it, and it's really the difference between being a superwoman who is all about doing,
Yeah.
and it's really more about being first and then doing. And so that's where this idea of insert the bee, it's all about the bee. So it's going from being a superwoman to being a superb woman.
Right. Well, as you were talking, I was getting deep chills, and a lot of people recognize that. I think that chills come either from, sort of like, a whisper from our soul that that's
Mhm.
something that's right on, or at least something deeper than our core about
Yeah.
the power of the truth in that. And
Mhm.
that, so when you were saying that the women can change the world, and yet if only they could realize that,
Yes.
I think that that sounds like that's incredibly important work. So
Mhm.
you started that. You were kind of unfolding your story by virtue of catching the snippets here and there that have come about, as the highlights of those
Mhm.
experiences. So 3 years ago, when that began for you, and I love what you said, giving yourself the gift of time too. That are just in that little bit, I see lots of quotables that we can put out in the article and the accompanying articles. You're very articulate and poignant in your, I think, bringing things down succinctly. So, what were you doing prior to that? I know you've had quite some corporate career. So, share a little bit with the audience and me, if you would, about what you were
Sure.
doing, 3 years ago and prior to that.
Yeah. I started off as a teacher way back when, like so many of us did, when we had options of being a teacher or a secretary or nurse.
Yes.
Um,
Right.
so I was a teacher, and I always felt like, since I was in first grade, I felt like I should be a teacher. And so there was no doubt in my mind that's the path I was going to go on. And I was an elementary school teacher for about 4 years and got totally burnt out. And
How long did you say? I'm sorry, how many years?
4 years.
4 years.
4 years, yeah. I put like 150% of myself into it. So passionate about teaching, and I just totally burned out.
Yeah.
So I went back to school to get a degree in higher ed administration, and while there, I got a summer job working for IBM.
Nice.
And at the end of the summer, they said, "Would you consider staying?" And I said, "Make me an offer."
Yeah.
And 20 years later, so that's how I ended up. I didn't know anything about corporate world. I had no intention of ever going into business. And that's how that kind of unfolded. So I was primarily in sales with IBM for most of those 20 years, moved around the country a few times with them. And then towards the end of my tenure, I have 3 children, and I kept pushing the envelope, shall we say, on a whole bunch of different aspects as it pertains to benefits. I was the very first salesperson that worked part-time in the Northeast for IBM. Because I just felt like, well, why not?
Yeah.
And I came back from, I think it was my second maternity leave, and I was working for a gentleman at the time who was very forward-thinking, believed that a balanced employee is a productive employee, also was self-aware enough to realize that he was a total workaholic, and if he, was proposing this to people, they would just kind of laugh. And so here's Janet coming back from maternity leave, and so he asked me to start the first work-life balance initiative for IBM in New Jersey. This was in the early 90s. I had never heard the term before.
Wow.
And but being the good corporate employee, I said, sure. So we put together a cross-functional, cross-level group of people and brainstormed on ways to make it so that when you're at work, you're at work. When you're at home, you're at home.
Right.
And did things like, we had a cafeteria on site. We had them make take-home dinners. It was back in the days when people actually went to the post office, so we sold stamps. We brought in workshops and seminars at lunchtime. We did walking clubs. We did a plethora of things, and I found that was my passion.
Yeah.
And
What part of it did you love? I mean, what was, yeah.
Well, I got back to teaching. I got back to, I was standing up in front of a room one day, giving a workshop, and I realized, oh yeah, I'm a teacher. And I didn't, I hadn't thought in those ideas before. I knew I was supposed to be a teacher. I was disheartened that it wasn't working out for me in the classroom, but now I found this is what I was supposed to do.
Teaching adults who are there ready to learn.
Yeah, exactly. And, and then I found this, I also had a passion about the subject, that I really believed, like my manager had said, that a balanced employee is a productive employee. And I really believed in the necessity of having a balanced lifestyle. It was the only way I could get through having 3 children and working full time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the universe showed me all different reasons why it was time for me to leave IBM. And back in 2000, I left and I started my own, I developed a workshop and I marketed it to Fortune 500 companies, helping their employees to find balance in their lives so that they could be more productive as well. So that was my first foray back into entrepreneurship back then. And I did that for a while. I went back and I got I got certified as a coach. So I am an ICF accredited coach. And then I went back and got a master's degree in spiritual psychology. And my second year project, we had to come up with something that used the principles and also stretched us. And I came up with this idea. I did that 30-day thing again. And I realized that women had this hunger to connect with other women, and there was no place to do it. So I came up with an idea for a professional women's center that would be a place for connection, conversation, learning, and relaxation. And put a business plan together, realized I probably had something here, and then in the fall of 2007 opened Professional Women's Center in Montclair, New Jersey, which was fabulous, and the market crashed, as we all remember.
Yeah.
So I had that business for about a year and a half, sadly had to close the doors, and gratefully my friend asked me to come on board and help her out with some business development work for those 3 years. Well, I kind of got, my sea legs again.
Yeah.
And then the rest is history.
Well, you have the kind of skills that are more and more needed in today's world. And that is, basically a synthesizing, of different people. And, the spiritual component is certainly a large part of it that's often overlooked in corporate. And yet it sort of motivates and drives everything in the end.
Yeah.
So I would think that, plus having had the background in corporate culture, I would imagine that you would have quite a bit of success contracting your services to corporations still.
Yeah. It's interesting going back into corporations. I kind of.
I know.
But there's such a need.
There is a need. It's funny you say that. I was a member for a while of SHRM.
Yes.
Organization, so human resource organization, and it is a very different culture. I've always been an entrepreneur. I actually, interestingly, used to work for, I think you used to serve Kraft Foods. Uh-oh, my dog's scratching at the door. Hopefully she'll stop.
Mine's here too, so.
Well, mine's not here, and that's the problem. She's out.
Yeah.
But I used to work for Nabisco, which is now Kraft Foods. But I was always in, I was sales and then sales management in the field. So it was never corporate. And after that, it's always been entrepreneurship. And so it's a very different culture when you go into the corporate world. And so what's interesting about that connection is that a lot of the people that are audience to the Boomers Reinvented are at the place where they're actually leaving corporate and trying to figure out if they can be an entrepreneur and even what that entails, because it's such a different dynamic, it's such a different world.
Yeah.
So now you had that transition yourself to some extent, right?
Yeah. I didn't catch what you just said.
Did it blip off for a second?
Yeah.
You had that transition yourself at some point from corporate to entrepreneurship, right? So
absolutely.
So when you went, was that the place where when you took the time after the 3 years, that was when you were helping your friend. So when you left corporate to do your own thing, so at that juncture, what was it like for you, and what kind of, rethinking of yourself and your life and your approach did you need to do?
It was huge. It was one of the scariest, maybe the scariest time in my life. Wow. Because not only had I been, for 20 years in this organization, but I was in, back in the days, IBM was this culture. It was like a family. So I was like leaving the family. And I didn't have support at home for this move. So I was really out there on my own. So it was a very scary thing. And I also think it was the best thing I could have done for myself. I was a person who lived my life by shoulds. I did whatever I thought you wanted me to do. And that was my entire life up till that point. And this was the first time that I really listened to myself. And I knew that, where I was dying inside. It was not right for me. My soul wanted to get out there and do what it was supposed to do. And I just took that risk, and I believed in myself and took that leap, hoping the net would appear, and it did. And it's been a journey, but it's been the best thing for me. But there were moments, because when you grow up in the when you're accustomed to the corporate environment, I was very good at maneuvering a corporation and finding the right resources. So I think that skill has helped me tremendously as an entrepreneur, because I know how to go out and find resources and network and things like that. But I was also very dependent on, I had this, people behind me to take care of me. And I remember one time my computer broke, and I was like, where's my IT department? Yeah. And I literally called the guy I used to work with and said, can you please just help me? So that took some adjusting. And then you realize, I thought I did a lot of things in my sales job, but you do everything as an entrepreneur, and it's not a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
It's a 24/7 job. So it took some adjusting, but and you have to, I believe not everyone is meant to be an entrepreneur. And when I work with my coaching clients, that's one of the things we explore. It's, I love being an entrepreneur, but I have the temperament for it, and I can work by myself. There are people who, need to be around other people, and as much as people don't, it's not the cool thing to be in a corporation. Some people, security is a big thing for them, and that's a good thing. So it's more about exploring what's really important to you. And that's what I talk about all the time, and that it starts with your values and understanding, who you are, what's important to you, what's important to your family, your community, whatever it is, and then crafting the life to support that.
Yeah, I want to talk in a few minutes about the coaching work that you do and how it might differ for entrepreneurs versus corporate, because I'm sure that there are ways that you help and serve both, and that it would be a little bit different. And I'm saying that so I won't forget to come back to it, but I want to back up just a minute to your talk, that critical juncture where you're in that huge transition, mode. And it's like that leaping from one, trapeze to the next.
Yeah.
And that leap of faith, and also the shoulds that you talk about. So backing all the way up to the shoulds, which is where we started this part of the conversation, I think that's been a huge part of our generation.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's because it was a part of our parents' and grandparents' generation, and so that was passed down.
Yes.
And that many of us railed against that, especially those on the leading edge of the boomer generation during the 60s and 70s. We Will Rock You and all the sit-ins and smokeouts and riots and all that occurred. And yet so many of those ended up being absorbed back into the corporate body in a way. And I think some of those are kind of coming out the other side now, looking back, trying to figure out what happened. So maybe we could stop there for a little bit and address, or back to you to address this concept of the shoulds, because I know that that's a large part of your work, even in the name of your site, which is the SuperBwoman.com.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I do a whole talk on shoulds, because my belief is that a should is anything that someone or something outside of yourself has said is true that you have taken on as true, whether or not it is. Yeah. And I like to think of them now as red flags. And it's a reminder to me now when I hear, and we all have it, it's all this little voice that's playing that, oh, I should do that, oh, I should do this.
Yeah.
right? Like comparing and contrasting. And when I hear that, it's an opportunity for me to go inside and say, is this true or not? And then it's another opportunity for me to either learn to let it go, which is a whole nother thing, or to take action, to do something appropriate around that. So I like to say now I lead a should-free life. It doesn't mean I don't hear the word should come up every once in a while. But I have learned, and I was just having this conversation this morning with one of my clients. When we hear those shoulds, and especially moms have the mommy guilt kind of thing, because guilt comes free of charge with shoulds. And so when you hear those things come up, oh, I should be at my kid's baseball game or whatever, when you've got a big meeting, that is, you always have a choice. You always have a choice on how you respond, how you feel about something. I think people aren't aware of that they have the choice on how they do it, but it's not easy, to say, let it go is nice to say, but your brain is wired. If you've been conditioned to think this way, then your brain is wired to go that way. And so what you have to do when you let it go is you have to rewire your brain. And so it's one of these things where, let's say I should go to my son's baseball game, and then you go, but you remind yourself, I am choosing not to go. And make it a choice. It's a conscious choice. And sometimes, probably for the first, hour, you have to do it 500 times. And then it lessens and lessens. And the mind finally, it's like, oh, okay. And then it will eventually kind of fade away. But, it's about conscious choice. It's about living consciously and being aware of what you were doing and why you're doing it.
That's such an important point, and it can go so deep, because what comes to mind, and this is not the kind of conversation you can necessarily have with just anyone on a light level, and that has to do with, again, the layer of conditioning that we're all operating under, even when we have no idea we're operating under it.
Right.
Under that conditioning. So for instance, when you were talking about the baseball game, etc., that conditioning begins for us as in, like in the media and in movies. As much as I love Disney and movies and all those kinds of things, back to the movies we grew up with as children, where it's like the children had the intelligence and the adults seem clueless a lot of times, because those are funny movies for kids. But then it's the movie showing the kids so sad and traumatized because mom or dad couldn't make the game. And the conditioning about, therefore, what a good parent means, what it means to be a good parent, is there. That starts there. And so then you have to ask ourselves, and this is where the unraveling of the conditioning begins. Is it really true? Yes. Is it true that I do not love my son? Is it true that if I don't attend the game, it means that I don't love my son?
Right.
And no, of course, we know it's not true. And so then we begin to say, okay, so therefore, if I'm going to go, because if I don't go, it means I don't love my son. If I go, then it shows to him or her that I love them. Then it's based on what other people are thinking and saying about me. It's not based on what I know to be true.
Yep, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. It's so true. It's so true.
Yeah. So now when you left and you said you didn't really have the support at home, I mean, first of all, and I know this being an entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur's journey is often a roller coaster, not only in terms of success and failures, which is how we learn, getting up and going and falling and getting up and going again, but also, in terms of our self-doubt. And so for you to have been, that strong in making that leap to the other trapeze, in spite of having a support network, reveals a very powerful soul and a strong woman on the inside that it seems like in some ways you were just becoming acquainted with, even in that time.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that was one of those pivotal moments in my life. And that, up until that point, I think I played very small in my life, throughout my life. Marianne Williamson has one of my favorite quotes about who are you to play small in the world. And I did, because, for a variety of reasons, societal reasons, family of origin reasons. I wanted people to like me. And if I let this big personality come out, then, it wasn't working. So, yeah. So, I'm sorry?
You felt like you would have to apologize in a way. If we let that out, we feel like, I'm sorry, but,
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry,
so I just learned to, tamp it all down, and then just live by, whatever I felt that anybody else wanted me to be like. And that worked until it didn't work anymore.
Yeah. So then when you let her out, when you let the superb woman out, well, first of all, and if this is too personal, you only share what's comfortable. And when you said you didn't have the support at home, I presume that included with your spouse.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
So did
my ex.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
So
and it was it was one of many things that was kind of enlightening to me, shall we say. And I've talked to other women since then, and it's been a number of years now, but in relationships, you grow, and some people, you grow like this. Right. And sometimes when people are growing, then the other person doesn't want to grow. Right. And doesn't want you to grow. And right. That's kind of what happens.
Yeah. And then also sometimes you grow in different directions,
Exactly.
That, here we started out both in the apple orchard, and now he's over in the orange orchard, whatever.
Exactly.
He's growing differently and has different needs.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So
it's all good.
Yeah. But part of what's made it good for you today, I think, is the fact that you went through, the dark years, so to speak, and the trials and tribulations and anguish and torment and fear and self-doubt and all of that pressure, tension, and whatever that helped birth you to the next side, essentially.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's easy. Of course, it's easier looking back than when you're in it. But yeah. And one of the things that I'm known for now is my hair. As much as it bugged me for the longest time, but it was kind of like my calling card. But I dyed my hair for years and years and years.
Dyed it what color?
About your color.
Brown. Okay.
It was a dark brown.
So you were silver early? So
yeah.
Okay.
I started getting silver when I was 13 years old.
Wow.
Yeah. So I had, in high school, I started to get a silver streak. And in college, I definitely had a silver streak. It kind of, Cruella de Vil-ish. And it was kind of my trademark. It was very cool when I was starting off in my 20s as a salesperson. It made me look more mature.
Yeah.
And then I would have kept it. But then, getting back to the shoulds, I was 33 when I got married, and had a very prominent streak at that point. And my mother said to me, "You cannot have wedding pictures with a veil and gray hair."
Aww.
And I went, "Oh, okay." And so I dyed my hair. And then my husband was younger than me, and so he didn't like it that I looked older. So, I kept dyeing my hair for many years. And then probably, 10, 12 years ago, I, for those of you who dye your hair, kind of see roots coming in. And I would see these silver strands, and I thought, I bet it's nice. And so I said again to my ex, "I think I'm going to let my hair go silver." And he goes, "Don't. You'll look like Barbara Bush." And I'm like, "Oh, really?"
Wow.
So, just one more thing. So, and there are people, there are women, there are websites. I belong to a group on Facebook that's called Going Gray and Loving It. And it's like a support group for women who, are like dipping their toe into the idea of letting their hair go natural. And to me, it's like it's your hair, do what you want to do. But you know, it's just one of those big cultural things. And people can, you know, it's like high school all over again. People can be very mean,
Yeah.
say things to you. And now I'm like, what you think of me is your opinion. You know, it doesn't bother me.
That's right. That's your business. It doesn't bother me. Absolutely. I love this because, you know, this is very much in alignment with our lifestyle. I grew up in Hawaii and on the island of Kauai. And I think one of the benefits of that, besides, I mean, some of the obvious, it was just a wonderful place to grow up, very enchanted. But the other benefit is that there wasn't a lot less of the societal, you know, straight-laced, uptight kind of shoulds.
Yep.
Shoulds were more in terms of family values and, you know, shame. You know, you don't do certain things to shame your family or, you know, that kind of thing, which are actually, many of which are good, you know, and it wasn't like it was coloring your hair would or wouldn't shame your family kind of thing. It wasn't like that. So I think that helped me be free of a lot of that, which, and then not having ever worked in corporate, you know, like you were saying, it can be very restricting, and it sort of sets an insular kind of existence. So, for instance, if we were having, you know, you remember? I'm sure in corporate, especially when you went on your own, since it was around 2000, where it still was not cool to work from home. It was still considered, unprofessional, and in particular. If you heard a dog scratching on the door or a dog whining or a child crying or a phone ringing or whatever. And so when you think about it, that's life. I mean, we are people and these are the lives we lead. And every hair is not perfectly in place. And, you know, we have things that go on in our existence and we have interruptions and we don't have to separate ourselves from them. They're just a part of who we are and what we do.
Exactly.
So I love that about the hair. I don't dye my hair. I never, and I never will. I don't have early gray, but I admire hair like yours. It's so beautiful. And I can only hope that as the rest of mine gets that way, I've got some strands here and there, that it will look as elegant and beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's wonderful. So that reminds me of the fashion shoulds. I mean, that's a whole other kind of soapbox. But you know, I remember years ago hearing, I think it was even not long after we moved to the mainland from Hawaii, hearing on Oprah, you know, this fashion person coming on saying something like, of course, you should never wear white shoes after September 1st, after Labor Day. You should never, you know, wear or do this or that. And really it comes down to, according to who? You know, really?
Right.
No, says who? You know, says who that you should color your hair kind of thing. I saw one recently. It was about grammar and punctuation and how boomers, and I'm sure you remember this as a teacher, we grew up typing, being told that we were to double space after a period. Okay. Yes. And so I saw something recently that said advice on blogging or whatever, don't double space after a period because people will know you're a boomer. And I think
I saw that.
Did you see that?
It's a very hard habit to break. It's a very
It is a hard, and personally, I prefer to read it that way because it's just easier for me to see the lines and the separations when there's more of a separation between sentences. I like it that way. I didn't even know they changed it, you know.
I know. I learned that when I was writing my book, and I did the whole thing with the double space. I had to go back and change. Oh,
yeah, to change it all, and there was no easy. You know, it's like, who told you, right? I mean, you were a teacher. Right. And, you know, when did the rules change and why? And who said that rule is right and this one isn't?
Yep, exactly. I know.
So tell us about your book.
So my book, I should have it here. I don't, should. My book is called Soul in Control, Reflections of a Reformed Superwoman. And what it is, it's a compilation of stories, vignettes, musings about my journey over a 10-year period of time, going from this crazed superwoman to being a superb woman. And it's observations about life. Often funny observations about life. And how it came about was when I started my first business back in 2002, I started a newsletter and would write these monthly articles. And I would have years later, people would say, "Oh, remember that article you wrote, about 3 years ago? Oh man, I wish I could read that again." And I had enough people saying that to me that I thought, I've got like this many articles. So it's really kind of the best of my which turned into a blog over a 10-year period of time.
Excellent. Okay, well, we'll definitely link to that, link to your book. Or is it primarily for sale on Amazon?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll definitely link to that. And so I like the title, and would you like to expand just a little bit more on the superb woman concept? Like, I know the thing about, I don't know how you did it with 3 kids and working full time.
I don't know how I did it either.
Me?
I don't know how I did it either.
Yeah, I mean, it's insane. And so, but that's the other part. It's like, well, we can go, it's a whole other show, right? Or a whole other talk about, what's expected of women and how the roles have changed and how they need to change and that sort of thing. But could you give a little glimpse into like the workshops you do or the presentations you do and what your advice would be to someone who's still trying to do it all, work full time, be a mom, etc.?
Yeah, thank you. Most of the workshops I do are about letting go of this superwoman persona. Hanging up the cape is one of my workshops. Living a should-free life is another workshop. Same kind of theme, and it really hits on a few key points. One is about the shoulds, and we do a lot of work around shoulds. I also, every single client I have, every single workshop I have starts with values. I believe that values are like your DNA. It's who you are. And your values stay with you throughout your life. So if you valued friendship as a child, you value friendship now. May shift in priorities over the years, but it's part of you. And so many of us think we know what our values are, but have you ever written them down? And so what I do is I take people through an exercise where they write down their values. And then we also write down your activities. We go through life blindly, kind of on autopilot so often. We have no idea what we do. Getting back to my ex, one day I was not real happy with him and wanted to prove to him everything that I was doing. And I came up with 6 pages of things that I was doing in my life. Which is ridiculous that I would have that much stuff on there. But that was an eye-opener to me also, just how much I was invested in the doing part. Yeah. And so we take a look at comparing that, what are you doing and how does that compare to your being part, who you are and what are you honoring in yourself and what are you not honoring in yourself? And so we take a look at all of that. And then we go back to like what you were talking about, these societal messages that we got. I talk about how, we're all influenced at a very early age by people around us, by the media, by all sorts of things. And I talk about in my life how I was a big TV gal. My family loved TV. And so Roy Rogers was one of my first heroes. So I wanted to do good like Roy Rogers. I felt that I needed to be a housewife like Mrs. Cleaver. Yeah. The perfect housewife and keeping everything under control.
But that was her full-time job.
What?
But that was her full-time job.
That was her full-time job, yes. But then came along Mary Tyler Moore. And here's an example of a woman who worked and had a cool apartment. And so I had all of these things swirling inside of me. And I had a mother who was a stay-at-home mom and a grandmother who was a teacher. So it's like I kind of did a mishmash of everything. But in the back of my mind, unconsciously, I had all of these shoulds that were piling up. And so what a lot of my workshops do is help people to gain awareness in their life of these things that are unconscious, that are there. They're not consciously acting on them, but very much unconsciously. Yeah. And it's really to kind of have people go, oh, and those little light bulbs going off. And have them realize, because so often you hear things like, oh, I don't have any time for that. Or I'm too busy. That's a favorite. And yeah, you are. But if you really take a look at how you're spending your time and what you're spending your time on, you probably could free up a lot, and do things that are more self-serving rather than, the should serving.
Right. When you were talking about the shoulds, the doing versus being for women, it occurred to me that, and you may even, if you haven't already done this, it could be an entrepreneurial thing because it's as applicable to entrepreneurs. For instance, you were talking about when you first left corporate and you realized that you were a 24/7, as an entrepreneur. And then you were talking about how people get into, just fall into their lives essentially. And I've talked about that before as well. And, get to the other side of 50 and think what happened. And so it's like, what happened is we were busy doing. And so we didn't extract into the being enough to evaluate. And that's, separating into our beingness, which is that higher self, that visionary, that, spiritual side, is what allows us to get the big picture and come down into the trenches and apply it. And so relative to entrepreneurs, so the superb, entrepreneur, the superb business, the superb whatever, it's as applicable because so many entrepreneurs, like moms, get into the wearing every hat kind of
Absolutely.
Partly because we're doers, we are implementers, we're workers, we love working and we don't mind it. But what happens is at the moment we get into any highway of doing, then it's hard to exit. And when it's hard to exit, then we don't see the tower perspective of what needs to happen.
Mm-hmm. Oh, so true. Very wise.
Well, and it was stimulated by your comments. So I can easily imagine your talk being shifted to either of those audiences. So you give the Superwoman talk, or even in particular for the women audiences. And there's I've really gotten into podcasts recently, and this was on I think this was on Mike Dillard's Self-Made Man podcast, which is a fairly new podcast. And even though it says self-made man, it's very interesting for women as well. But there was one of his guests there, I don't remember which one, I will put it in the interview notes, or the article notes rather. She was talking about how since men were essentially the hunters, that women were more the gatherers. And so women are wired to basically do everything and see everything, to be all over, to be able to multitask. And, we have the 58 box of crayons. And the reason the guys only have the 8 box is because they were wired. They were wired. That. Yeah, they were wired to hunt or be hunted, and so they were wired for the game, wired for the action, wired for the what's wrong, whereas the women were all over doing everything, picking up all the pieces along the way. And so that's part of the differences. And so when we get into business, we do it as moms, and, and back to the shoulds, and I know I'm kind of all over the place because it's such a big topic on so many strands, but back to the shoulds, and that is, we were conditioned to think that certain doingness is what represented being a good wife, being a good woman.
Yep.
I remember in Hawaii, a friend in fact, it was a cousin of my boyfriend at the time. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she would even iron her husband's T-shirts because a crisp, clean, ironed T-shirt and underwear is what represented and qualified her as a good woman, just like what we started out talking about as being a good parent.
Yes. I had a similar experience with a client, a young woman who was a single mom, working very hard to support herself and her child, and was really, at her wit's end, just didn't have any time for anything. And so I was like, all right, so take me through your day. Let's go through this. And she said, okay, I get up at 5 o'clock and, I clean up the house. And then before the baby gets up, then, and the baby's like 18 months old. Before the baby gets up, then I iron his clothes. And then I did it. And I went, what? You iron a toddler's clothes? And she's like, yeah. And I said, why do you do that? She goes, well, that's what my mom did. And it's like, yeah, did your mom work? And it was almost a cultural thing for her. And it was one of those, like I talk about, the unconscious influences there, very similar to your example. This unconscious should, that you feel like, oh, well, I have to and then I was like, let's think about this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you really look at it, it's like, why do you have to do that? You know, is there somebody judging you? Are your kid going to get a grade at school for this or what? And that freed up a lot of time and anxiety for her. So yeah, it's really taking a look at, why are you doing some of these things?
Yeah, definitely. So when you talk, do you speak at, I know you do coaching, are you speaking to like at conferences and that women's conferences and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I speak, I speak within corporations. I do a lot of work with organizations, and conferences as well. Yeah.
Okay, so because I think that it's a very much needed topic. So I don't know if you're looking for more engagements, but we'll definitely
Always. Yeah.
definitely put your link to that because I think I'm so glad you're doing this work in the world and you have such a clear vision. I can only imagine the emails and notes that you get from women whom you're helping.
Yeah, it's very rewarding.
Who's hopefully, not all of them are ready. A lot of the people that go to these events go because they have to be there. Like if it's corporate training, they have to be there. And they're so stuck in the doing and in their life that they're not ready to, it's the Plato's allegory of the cave kind of thing, not ready to run into a brighter light of perspective yet.
Right, exactly.
But for those who are, there you are at the right time.
Exactly. And, I when I do these talks, it's very often not just women in the audience. And my message applies to men and women.
Yeah.
I just happen to focus on working with women, but the message is universal.
Definitely. Yeah. So do you have a brand name for when you package your programs to men as well, and men audience as well? So have you actually done?
What I do is like when I do hanging up the cape, it could be, going from Superman or Superwoman to SuperMan or SuperWoman.
Yeah, definitely. Because I know men are struggling too. They're trying, it's transitional times. That's just the era that we're in. And there's like you were during that time of your separation from corporate to entrepreneurship, when we're turning away from what has been and turning to face what is, we don't get the big picture right away.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I know. And, I did some work for a time with displaced executives, helping them to get back on their feet. And I found that the men were having a much harder time with this transition than women ever were. Women, getting back to what you were talking about, women are used to, okay, this isn't working, we'll try this. There's many things, and men are very singular focused. And their egos are so tied, their sense of self is so tied into their jobs that this kind of transition is very difficult for a lot of men. And so working with men is especially an especially unique challenge because it takes a special man that is willing to go there, to take a look at, who are they really underneath it all? What is their being? It's not to separate from the doing part. And that takes a lot of work. And the ones that do, amazing things happen.
Absolutely. Well, and along the lines of the shoulds for men, the shoulds is you should know how to be a man without necessarily any help from the outside. In other words, don't you know how to do that? You should know how to do that. And so it becomes this culture of not asking and not seeking help.
Exactly.
The Mike Dillard podcast that I mentioned, Self-Made Man, he's not a baby boomer. He's, I think, about 33, maybe.
Wow.
He's a Gen X or a millennial. And I have been so inspired by so many in that generation, some of whom would be boomer kids to boomers, because they're not as covered up with the shoulds, including about seeking learning. So back to your talking about how hard it is for the men to transition, women too. And I think that the easiest transition is when you seek learning and growth. Just as long as you're open, we become childlike and become open to learning and growth and not hold tightly to all of our assumptions, expectations, and means of conditioning, then we can have fun. That's when we can begin to have fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, I absolutely agree with that philosophy.
So speaking of philosophy and that sort of thing, back to your coaching now. I said I would get back to it. So the difference between coaching personal and corporate, can you elaborate on that? And I guess also from the standpoint of the people that tend to be drawn to you for help, how you can help them and how that works out.
Sure. So the individual coaching that I do is primarily for women who are stuck. A good picture of a typical client of mine is a working mom who works in a high-powered job, is feeling very frustrated, very overwhelmed, very overworked. She's definitely a superwoman. And she's stuck and she's not sure how to break out of it. And a lot of times they're not sure where they even want to go. And so what I do is we get real basic and we bring it back down and do what I was just talking about with the, looking at the values, looking at how you're spending your time now. One thing I really believe in is, when we're children, we are the closest thing to being our spirit, our soul, that we ever are in our lives. And so I really spend time listening to what they did as a child. What did they love to do as a child? And you learn so much from that. Like myself, I was a child that loved to explore. I would go out on my bike and I would go into the woods and on fields by myself. And
Wow.
and you can see that in what I do now. Those were the qualities there. And when I was in a corporate job where I was told what to do and I had to go on this way, and when I wanted to go explore over there, no wonder it didn't work.
Yeah.
So I spent a lot of time working with people, taking a look at, their childhood dreams. And when you can unleash that child inside of them, it's magic.
Yeah.
And that really gives a lot of answers there and helps put together a plan. And then I help people step through the plan. I'm a believer in baby steps. And you take this step and then you reassess and you go, okay, it's working. Okay, let's go. Oh, maybe we got to turn this way a little bit. But you got the goal in mind, and I help them to get there.
Yeah, so that's some do be. In other words,
Exactly.
Let's talk about being, and now you go do it that in that way.
Yeah.
Let's come back and be, and assess.
Yeah, beautiful. Yep, that's exactly right.
So is there a difference in the corporate clients that you work with versus, because it sounded like you said the high-powered executive woman who's trying to be the superwoman. And then how about the entrepreneur coaching clients? Has there been a difference?
I would say yes and no. So they come to me with different, there's different reasons why they come to me. Some of them, want to find a new job. Some of them want to find a job. Some of them don't know what they want to do. And some of them just want to talk about, being a working mom and how do you find balance doing that. It all comes back to the same thing though. So they may think they're all coming from different perspectives, but it all comes back to the same thing. It's that they have lost touch with who they are and they are not connected. They're not living a life that's connected with who they are, with their being.
So I didn't get this from you earlier when we first started, and that is you have 3 kids. What are their ages?
I have a 25-year-old son who lives in Beijing, China, and just got married. And I have a 22-year-old son who is a senior at Drexel University. And I have a 19-year-old daughter who is going to be a sophomore at Syracuse University.
Wow. So did you remarry or are you single?
I'm engaged.
Engaged. Okay, wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
How did you meet?
Online.
Online. Very nice. Was it a service? Through a service?
Yeah, it was actually Yahoo Personals, which I think has since been bought by Match.com.
Excellent.
We could do a whole nother show on that one.
Yeah, definitely. I think you should. I mean, you said you have a radio show too, right?
I have a live web show.
Web show. Okay, so we'll get those links from you and post them in the article so people can find you, because you have so much to share with the world. And I didn't get your birth date, and we normally ask the age since we're boomers and we're proud of it. So what year were you born?
1955. I just turned 60.
Oh my gosh, you look, 45 at the most. You look amazing.
Oh, bless you.
It's true. It's true. You just look beautiful and wonderful. Well, I'm very inspired by you and the work you're doing in the world, and I'm sure that our audience will be as well. I really appreciate you taking the time to share yourself and your wisdom with us. And I think this will post probably about in a week. I'll let you know in advance.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
You're welcome. Thank you. I'm going to turn it off, but we can stay on the line for just a minute.
Okay.